Well, what's led to the unrest has been over 3 decades of very repressive rule under the leadership of Nursultan Nazarbayev. Now, he's not officially the leader; he just heads the Security Council, and I know he's recently stepped down from that. But Kazakhstan is a very rich country in terms of oil and gas reserves, and Nazarbayev and his family and his clan have been the beneficiaries of this. Now, for many years, people were willing to deal with that. But since he's become more monopolistic, and the family controls pretty much all different types of industries besides just gas and oil, telecom industries, banking industries, construction industries, retail. And this has really gone too far for many average citizens in Kazakhstan. And that's coupled with very high levels of repression, where you have opponents that are arbitrarily put in prison, huge infringements on press freedom, and growing levels of corruption. And so when the gas prices happened, many people saw this as a result of the monopolistic practices and really high levels of corruption, and people had had enough.
Well, what are authorities doing to address the dissatisfaction expressed by the protesters?
I think that's one of the big problems. They don't really know what society wants and what to do other than offering some very quick fixes and handouts, because this is an incredibly authoritarian regime where everything is solved through these sort of patron-clientelistic relationships that you try to pay people off to keep them happy. But the problem is, while the cronies of the Nazarbayev clan and family are getting very, very rich, the average Kazakh citizen isn't really seeing any of the benefits of this. So they have quick fixes in place. And of course, there's always the threat of Russia invading again. Of course, they did bring in 2,500 troops to stabilize matters. And Kazakhstan has been really stable. I mean, there really were only protests recently in 2016 and 2019. And this is because the government just pays people off to keep them happy. But I don't think they're really addressing the root causes of what led to these massive protests.
And with foreign troops in place, will the violence be quelled? Are protests expected to continue?
Well, officially, the Kazakh government has said that everything is under control and that these protesters were terrorists. They also did a really good job effectively disabling any kind of communication. And protests in this day and age really require the use of the internet, Twitter, or other forms of communication to coordinate. And without any kind of information to share, it becomes more difficult for these protests to gain momentum and to become better organized. And I think there is a large chunk of the Kazakh population that really does want stability, that doesn't want this to be a completely unstable situation. And so for this reason, they probably are able to keep things under control.
Well, who are the 3,000 or so people who've been arrested, and what will happen to them?
Well, they'll be punished. Now, the Kazakh government officially, as I mentioned, is saying that these are terrorists, that these are these terrible people that have taken over peaceful protests, and that they need to be punished. And they will face very harsh punishment, because the human rights situation in Kazakhstan is terrible. I mean, there are arbitrary arrests going on just of anyone who just opposes the Nazarbayev clan, let alone anyone who was engaged in actual protesting. So I think we're going to see very harsh punishments and human rights violations taking place, although they'll do their best to hide this, because Kazakhstan has pretty good relationship with most Western countries.
Let's talk about then, how does that come into play amid all this unrest and violence and the political situation that's happening in Kazakhstan?
I think most Western countries are looking to see what Russia's going to do, but ultimately they would want stability in Kazakhstan because it has forged such important relationships. It has the 12th biggest oil reserves, the 15th biggest gas reserves in the world, and it has carefully cultivated relationships with other Western countries. And so I think we're going to see some rhetoric from Western countries saying that they want Russia to leave, that they want to ensure that human rights abuses don't take place. But ultimately, most of the allies would like to see Kazakhstan as stable as possible.
Natasha Lindstedt, thanks so much for talking to The World.
Thanks for having me.